Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and today I want to share my thoughts on the Stellar Blade demo that was released the other week. Now, Stellar Blade's been on a lot of people's minds for a handful of reasons for the last several months, but it's been something that's been kind of an enigma for me about how I was actually going to feel about the game. A lot of the pre-demo thoughts were the story premise seemed kind of cool, the world was really, dark and bleak, and the flashiness was all kind of top-notch, but there was really no indication of how the game would actually play or feel. We at best knew it was an action game and never really got any prolonged gameplay footage to sink our teeth into and start to understand. However, I think that actually ended up working a little bit in their favor, at least for people like me, because while it was presented, I feel at least, as a fast-paced action RPG with some precision combat for high skill ceiling players, after playing the demo, I found that it's a lot more methodical and technical than fast and flashy, which is a welcome change of pace for someone like me who prefers these kinds of playstyles. I'm not a big fan of just slashing and not really feeling like any of my weapon swings are making any impact. I want things like blocking, parrying, dodging, swinging the weapon, special skills. I want them all to feel like they have some weight. I was afraid this wasn't going to have that, and I was pleasantly wrong. So let me share what I overall think about the demo after playing it. The game starts off on an action-based premise with a mission going immediately awry. They're going to throw a whole bunch of names at you just to teach you and world build, but I don't need to tell you all that here. You can kind of see what's going on the screen. Of course, they immediately want you taking in all of the assets of the main character, Eve. Now, this is something that's been both criticized and applauded, which is not unlike what 2B went through prior to Nier Automata's release. We can only hope for Eve's sake that she gets the same sort of adoration post-release that 2B got. The game, however, makes it abundantly clear that gameplay needs to be king right away, providing a concise batch of tutorials that take you through a few small battles and a fairly simple boss battle. Now, as mentioned, the combat is slower and more methodical than I expected it to be. The heavy emphasis on parrying and frame-perfect dodging versus rapid arena movement means you're directly squaring off with opponents, only making distance when the situation feels appropriate. Now, against bosses, this creates a great power fantasy when you finally learn and perform well. Against random groups of enemies, though, I found it much less exciting, especially against larger numbers of smaller enemies. I'll keep this in mind as I progress further into the actual game, as I earn more skills and learn more about the gameplay, as I'm hoping this aspect will improve in the full game. Speaking of the parry and dodge, the former really feels like the focus here. Perfectly timing parries allows you to open up advantages against opponents. Now, some are minor, interrupting attack chains to give you a small counterattack chance before the enemy continues, while some are larger, made available after reducing the enemy's balance gauge through enough perfectly timed parries and some of the skills and items you can use. The larger openings allow you to perform retribution attacks, which deal absolutely massive damage, and it definitely feels like the focus of the game, to try to get enough parries to try to reduce that gauge to get these big retribution attacks. I did have one criticism of the retribution attacks, and this is something that kind of happens in some action RPGs, doesn't happen in others. If an enemy has a forced HP phase shift, you often will just not deal damage to them after a certain point. This was especially evident in the bonus boss battle that they had, where if I performed a retribution attack at a certain time, it would do almost nothing because the boss needed to phase before its HP could continue to go down. It's one of those things you'll have to keep in mind, so you might want to leave the balance gauge as is and just try to finish off that bit of HP without using all of it, because it feels like a big waste to get the retribution right as those HP pushes are happening. Now, dodging, on the other hand, feels more like a last resort. Anything short of a perfect dodge does basically nothing, and though you can get more dodge frames through equipment and talents, it never really felt good to me to dodge, if that makes sense. They do fortunately give you some skills that you can learn that make the dodging a lot more fun and a lot more fast-paced, something closer to what I was actually expecting in all of the pre-demo thoughts. That being said, I still found it way more satisfying to parry, and it's definitely going to be the primary gameplay style I look at in the full game. You can't parry everything, though. There are some things you are going to have to perfectly dodge, so having those different skills to keep the flow of the gameplay going is definitely welcome. And fortunately, you have a slew of other skills on top of that, including consumables and special abilities to help assist in combat. Some of them help reduce the enemy's balance gauge without needing to do a perfect parry. Some of them shred the enemy shields, which reduce the damage that they take until they're fully shredded, and some can even knock knock over enemies completely to allow you to continue combos more fluidly. That can be really great, especially when chained with skills together, and it's something that I think you're going to see the really high-level players using a lot. Now, speaking of combos, I do have another criticism. There's one really awkward bit about the gameplay that comes in this sort of stiffness after retribution attacks. Whenever Eve executes a retribution attack, she gets kind of, I guess, frozen in place while the enemy gets back up. It's a really strange feeling moment that under most circumstances doesn't allow you to follow up with another combo while the enemy is knocked down, something I would really like to be able to do. On the flip side though, enemies do the same thing for you. If they grab you and toss you to the ground or do some big special attack that you don't manage to avoid, they will sit there and wait for you to get up, which means they're not going to overwhelm you either. It's something that I kind of wish I could do without. I wish it was more like a difficulty setting, or it was something that was more for accessibility. Maybe that won't be the case in the full release, but it's something I definitely had to take note of here in the demo. As for other gameplay elements, fantastic music, great graphics, and the story is something I think I really need to see more of. It looks like they're trying to set this, dark, bleak setting, but whether or not that actually pans out to be something that's good, I can't really tell from the demo because they do very, very little other than kind of setting the stakes high. Exploration is a bit stiff, similar feeling to those post-execution attacks, especially when navigating small ledges and platforms. At the very least, it has a few nice surprises, collectibles, hidden paths, password-protected chests, and of course, enemies around the corner jumping you, which you can spot by using the game's handy scan feature. Now, I say handy because one of the things I definitely am not a fan of is that scan feature. Yes, it is useful, but I don't know about you. I'm kind of done with scanning in games at this point. I end up just spamming it nonstop to make sure I don't miss anything, and it's especially prominent here because most scanned objects only show up during the short scan itself, not persisting afterwards so you can track them. Perhaps you can get a talent for that at some point that makes it a little bit less tedious, but that's not my experience in the demo, and that's what I have to judge it on. On top of that, the scan actually has a short cooldown, so you can't just spam it over and over again. You got to wait a few seconds. So if you want to check an area really thoroughly because you're not sure if you missed something, you're going to have to stand there for a few seconds and wait while you pan the camera around. And that's just not something I want to do when I want to kind of get to the game's actual gameplay sections again. And as I mentioned before, there are some talent systems both for Eve herself and for her tumbler, which is the name of the little pod that follows her around. You don't really get to mess around with it too much, but there's absolutely some useful stuff in there. And in the boss challenge, you can get a better idea of what it's actually going to do in the full game. So I think I'm going to replay the demo and see how many of those I can realistically farm before it reaches the kind of point of no return where you beat the boss and it saves it and prepares it for the game's full release. But we'll see. I mean, I'm at least going to give it a shot because I don't mind grinding out a little bit before the game releases just to get a feel for fighting those overworld monsters a little bit more. Speaking of those overworld monsters, the game does allow you to farm them through a method that probably won't seem too unfamiliar. You can find campsites around the various parts of the map that have a whole bunch of functions that you can utilize, including spending your talent points and buying more consumables. The biggest one, of course, is that Eve can rest, and upon resting, all of the enemies in the area, or most of the enemies in the area, will respawn. So if you're one of those people that really likes grinding out that one particular skill before you move on, you can get your fix, or you can just keep moving on and take the skills as you get them. Either way works. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention there is an equipment-based system as well as an appearance system for Eve herself. For the equipment, it's all pretty basic stuff. You have stuff that increases attack speed. Some of it makes it easier to perfect block or perfect dodge. So there seems to be a decent bit of build variety that allows you to match your gameplay style. We'll need to see how those options expand in the full game, but I was pleased with what we saw, especially in the boss challenge. The appearance system for Eve is largely cosmetic as well, unless you decide to take off whatever equipment she's actually wearing and instead play in the skin suit that you briefly see at the start of the game. This actually disables all of Eve's shields, so it's another sort of difficulty modifier if you want to increase the challenge of the game overall. But it's something that's completely optional. I think most people want to see her in some sort of fly outfit. All in all, I definitely enjoyed the demo more than I thought I would. I really was expecting that kind of fast-paced, frantic gameplay that was a little bit too hack and slashy and not enough tactical. They didn't nail all of the systems as far as I'm concerned. That little bit of clunkiness is definitely noticeable in a game that seems like it really wants you to focus on the gameplay more than anything else, but I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. The experience I had here was enough to get me to purchase the game on day one, and I'll have more full thoughts about how most of that functions in the full game after that. And that's going to be a wrap for my thoughts on the demo for Stellar Blade. Be sure to like and subscribe. I'll probably release a full thoughts video after the game comes out. For those of you who do subscribe to this channel, you're probably expecting a few other full thoughts videos. Don't worry, I had to take a little bit of a break from content creation for a week and a half or so just to take care of some other important stuff. But this channel is going to start pumping out a few more videos, especially throughout the month of April. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. And until then, take care.